All right. Looks like we are all set. All right. So welcome everyone. The title of today's talk is Battle Royale, Logic App versus Power Automate. We would like to thank our sponsors and make sure you mark your calendar for the upcoming SharePoint conference, which will be in between March 23 to 25 next year in MGM Grand Resort in Las Vegas, USA. Without the sponsors, this event would not have been possible. So please watch the videos and read the information about them. The organizers will also be giving away 3 Oculus Quest. And to participate in that, what you have to do is watch the videos, submit your answers, and then they will pick one winner in each region, like Americas and a couple of others. So the 10% of the funds from this event is from the sponsor is going to support the community relief program. So if you are interested, you can follow these links and make the donations as well. So who am I? My name is Prashant G. Bhoyar. I was born and raised in India. Came to United States back in 2007 for studies. I'm University of Maryland College Park alumni. I co-authored a book, PowerShell for Office 65. I also acted as a technical reviewer for the book Pro SharePoint 2013 Administration. I am from Washington DC area and I organize user groups and local conferences over there. So a couple of user groups are one is on AI and machine learning, second one is on Office 65. As I mentioned, I organize some local events. So one of the couple of local events that are Global AI Bootcamp, which is a day-long free event. We are going to organize AI ML Fest on 31st of July, which is going to be a free virtual event. And the focus of that event will be the contents related to AI and machine learning. So if you are interested, just check out the link on the meetup site and then you'll get to know the registration and some other information. We will also be organizing Azure Data Fest in October this year, most likely a virtual event. And I also help organize SharePoint Saturday Baltimore as well as a DC event. I am currently recipient. I am recipient of Antarctic Service Medal, and from last 3 years, I have been getting awarded Microsoft MVP. So those of you who are not familiar with this program, I don't work for Microsoft. It's just the additional recognition that Microsoft gives out to the folks who does technical contribution. And the technical contribution can be in the form of creating videos, writing blog posts, answering people's questions on various forums, or providing direct feedback to the Microsoft on various products. So I've been MVP since 2017. For first 2 years, I was SharePoint MVP, and last year I transitioned to AI MVP. Right now, I work as solution architect with a company called Rhythm Digital. Earlier, we used to call Porto Solutions, and we got acquired by Rhythm by 3 years before. I focus on intelligent business process automation, and I work from Rhythm's Bethesda, Maryland, USA office. So we have done 100 plus Microsoft Cloud deployments. We have 50 plus consultants, and we are Microsoft Gold partner from 17 years, and we have 3 MVPs on the staff. So if you are interested in joining our team, feel free to reach out to me via LinkedIn, Twitter, or you can email me. So let's talk about today's talk. So the agenda is going to be we'll start with what's Power Automate. We'll touch base on key concept of logic apps, and then we'll spend a lot of time on talking about the key differences between the Power Automate and logic apps. We will then talk about how to extend Microsoft Flow using logic apps, best practices, demos, key takeaways, and Q&A. So even if I mention Q&A towards the end, feel free to stop me at any time and ask the questions. I will be monitoring the questions as well, but if you like, feel free to post your questions there. All right. Let's see. Okay. So let's talk about what Microsoft Flow is. So this is when Microsoft Flow basically helps people and team work smarter by automating processes across their apps and data. So Microsoft made a first announcement about Microsoft Flow back in April 2016. and it's a software as a service offering, and Microsoft launched this as a successor to SharePoint 2013 Designer Workflows. A successor word is important because they are not saying it's a direct replacement, but it's a successor. That means there may or may not be the same functionality that you get with Designer will be available in Microsoft Flow. It has inbuilt connectors, and you can create your own connectors as well. You can start from scratch, or you can use pre-built templates as well. There is a mobile app available for Microsoft Flow, which you can use to track, manage, and create flows. And there is on-premise gateway available. Since Microsoft Flow is a software as a service offering, that means it will be hosted by Microsoft. And let's say if you are using SharePoint on-prem, or you wanna integrate your on-premise data with Microsoft Flow, the way we can do it is you have to install on-premise gateway, and that way you can do the integration. The new features are getting added pretty frequently. It's very hard to keep up with all the latest and greatest that is happening in Microsoft Flow. One of the key things that you have to keep in mind is, so using Microsoft Flow or Power Automate, you can create workflows using Office 65 products and services, Microsoft products, and other third-party products as well. That means you using single tool, you can create automations for a lot of different products and services. Last year, Microsoft renamed Microsoft Flow as a Power Automate. And now within Power Automate, we have Microsoft Flow, we have UI Flow, and we have a business process flow. So during the course of this talk, I will be using a Power Automate somewhere, and I will be using Microsoft Flow somewhere, some instances, because at the end of the day, you will be still creating the flow. And Flow is a part of a larger umbrella called Power Automate. So how to access flow? So if this is the first time you're seeing the flow, then uh, uh, Microsoft Flow is part of Office 65. You can sign up for the flow with just live or Microsoft account as well. You don't need a dedicated Office 65 subscription for it. You can go to flow.microsoft.com and sign up for it. And if you go to the Office 65 portal, then you will see a button called Power Automate, which you can click and you can access the flows from there as well. Let's talk about some of the limitations of the flow before we jump on to the logic apps, and then we'll cover the meat and potatoes of this talk, where basically we'll be talking about the key differences between the logic apps and Microsoft Flow. So right now, there are no state machines available with Microsoft Flow. You can use some workarounds. There is a nice blog post and video out there from one of the community contributor and Microsoft MVP, Sergey Luca. You can check his documentation, but again, it's not directly supported by the product. You have to use some workaround. We can have maximum 250 actions per flow, and we can do maximum of 500 iterations in do until and for each action. This one is the big one, and you always need to keep in consideration while creating the flows and while designing the flows is the maximum duration of the flow is 30 days, and there is no way you can bypass that. So you have to keep that in mind while creating your automation using Microsoft Flow. There are no way to see all the flows associated with the SharePoint list of libraries. Like if you compare that with SharePoint Designer, like if you have used SharePoint Designer or any other third-party product like Nintex or K2, if you go to a SharePoint list of library, you can see all the workflows that you have created for that particular list of library. That's not possible right now with Microsoft Flow, and there is no way to see all the approval history of a flow as well. So some of the basic things about a flow will always consist of connectors. Like a connector is a way to make your flow talk with the various system, and that can be your Exchange, it can be SharePoint, it can be OneDrive, or it can be Salesforce, it can be Google, it can be AWS as well. Then trigger. So every flow needs to have a trigger. That means how the flow will get started, whether it's going to be a manual trigger or it based on an event like create, update, or delete it, or based on a location. Then inside your flow, you will have some conditions and some actions. So right now, when it comes to the flow, you can schedule the flows, or you can uh, start the flow manually, or you can trigger the flow from a location as well. So you can, as I mentioned before, you can create a flow from the scratch, or you can also use templates. Templates are a big are a much better way to start playing with flow, especially if you are new to this tool, because templates will give you an idea like how to, what kind of actions you have to use, what kind of trigger you have to use whenever you want to implement certain automation scenario. If you are somewhat expert, I will refrain. I will advise of not using the templates and start with the scratch. The reason is these templates won't get updated, especially if a new version of action come. Let's say there is action to send an email, and a template got built using that action 3 months before, and now a new version of action came out. There are chances that the template won't get updated with a new version of action. You won't face that problem if you start building flow from the scratch. So if you are totally new, then use templates, or if you want to understand how to implement a particular automation scenario, you can start using a template. But if you are a pro, start using from scratch. So now with that, let's talk about what's Logic App and why, how these two products are connected. So Logic Apps are a fully managed, integrated platform as a service offering from Microsoft. It allows developers not to worry about building, hosting, and scalability. Like everything is managed by Microsoft, and it's a part of Azure subscription. They can be scaled automatically to meet the demand. It provides you a way to implement scalable integration and workflows in the cloud. Just like Microsoft Flow, there are many connectors are available across cloud and on premises. And again, just like Microsoft Flow, Logic App also begins with a trigger, and that trigger can be based on an event, and you can integrate your custom APIs with the Logic App. So similarly, the key concept that are there in Flow are there in Logic App as well, where you need to have a connectors, you need to have a trigger, you need to have action, and you can also, there is additional thing available which is enterprise integration pack, which we can use with the Logic Apps. Again, the trigger, we can have a schedule based trigger, or we can have a trigger based on an event. And you can also use a code view to write Logic Apps. So now see, like, let's see where exactly, like how these two tools are connected, like how Azure Logic Apps and Flow are related to each other. So Microsoft Azure is huge, and there are many services and products available inside Azure. And Logic App is one of the products inside Azure. And Microsoft Flow is built on the top of the Logic App. So if you look at the UI and the development experience, you will see there is a lot of similarity when it comes to creating a Logic App and creating a Microsoft Flow. And the reason for that is Microsoft Flow is built on the top of Logic App. Uh, and Logic App is the main workflow engine in Azure. However, even though Microsoft Flow is built on the top of Logic App, there are certain differences between the two. If you see this Venn diagram, so Logic App brings a lot to the table, and Microsoft Flow also builds a lot to the table. But there is some common things that we can do using both the Logic Apps and Microsoft Flow. And there are some things which we can only do using Microsoft Flow or only can do using Logic Apps. So one of the things that we can only do using Microsoft Flow is since now Microsoft Flow is renamed as a Power Automate. Inside Power Automate, we can create business process flows where we can create state machines, and the flows can run for more than 30 days. We can create UI flows, which is the RPA offering from Microsoft. There are some additional actions like SharePoint approval are only available in Microsoft Flow and not available in Logic Apps. The list is big, but this diagram is just to give you the highlight or the broader picture, like how these three products or services are aligned, where Azure is the main one. It's a public cloud offering from Microsoft. Logic App is the workflow engine in Azure. Microsoft Flow is built on top of Logic Apps, but however, it also has its own features and unique things. So now let's talk about the main part of this talk. Here we'll go with the comparison of Microsoft Flow and Logic App one by one. So as I mentioned in the previous slide, Logic App is part of the Azure group. So Azure product group basically is in charge of Logic App, whereas Microsoft Flow or Power Automate is a part of Business Apps group, which can comes under a Dynamics group. The reason I mentioned that here because this has a lot of this dictates like why uh, uh, you will see some feature parity or some things are easily available in Power Automate or Flow but are not available in Logic Apps. So I see a question is, do a SharePoint approval in Flow have the publish, approve, measure version ability, just like we do in out of the box 2010 workflows? Yes, we have that options available in SharePoint Online, like where you can use SharePoint approval to publish, measure and measure versions. So when it comes to the key differences, so as I mentioned, Logic App is in platform as a service offering, whereas Power Automate is a SaaS offering. The key difference, one of the key difference between those two is Logic App pricing is work the same way as Azure, where you pay based on your usage and consumption, whereas Power Automate is subscription based. And based on your subscription, some things may or may not be available. The main target audience for Logic Apps are IT professionals and developers, whereas the Power Automate, the main target audience are power users. So basically, what the Dynamics group did is they basically created a product on the top of Logic App, which is more power user friendly, and that's how Microsoft Power Automate came into picture. There is like if you want to create logic apps with a modern SharePoint list and library, there is no direct integration available. Whereas if you are using SharePoint Online and if you turn on the modern experience and if you go to a list or library, in the ribbon itself, you will see the option to create a Power Automate. That kind of integration is not available. So if I had to create a logic app which is based on a SharePoint list, I had to start from Logic Apps portal. Whereas in Flow, I have two options. I can either start from SharePoint and click on a Power Automate there inside a list or library, or I can directly go to a Power Automate and start creating a flow and add a SharePoint as my trigger. So that's something you have to keep in mind. So when it comes to Logic Apps versus Power Automate, within Logic Apps, we can only create automation, like which are basically Logic Apps. Whereas under Power Automate, you can create Microsoft Flow, we can create business process flows, and we can create UI flows as well. This is a big one. So the maximum run duration for Logic App is 90 days. It's not readily available. You will need to work with Microsoft support to have this, but that's the maximum you have. That means if my Logic App starts today, then that Logic App should end within next 90 days. Whereas the flow, the hard limitation is 30 days. There is no way you can bypass this. When it comes to application lifecycle management, since Logic App is part of the Azure umbrella, there is a really good story available. We can use Azure DevOps, we can use source control. There is a support for testing, support automation, and manageability in Azure Resource Manager is available. Whereas uh, the way you do ALM in Microsoft Flow or Power Automate is you basically design and test your flow in non-production environments, and then you promote those to the production environment when you're ready. So in terms of implementing source control, there is no direct method available. You had to implement some additional steps to have a proper source control for your flows. If you would like to automate some deployment scenarios or if you want to do some changes, uh, a PowerShell commandlets are available, but for to use that against Logic Apps, the model you had to install is Azure RM.Logic App model. Whereas when it comes to Microsoft Flow or Power Apps, you have to install two separate modules. One is for administrators and one is for developers. The administrator module is Microsoft.PowerShell.administration.PowerShell, whereas for developers, it's Microsoft.PowerApps.PowerShell. So when it comes to triggers, so manual trigger is available both in Logic Apps and Flow. We have created, updated, deleted triggers as well. We have a schedule as well. That means I can run Logic Apps and Flow on schedule. Whereas there is one additional trigger available in Flow, which is not available in Logic App, which is location. So I can trigger a Flow. If I use a location-based trigger, then I can design a flow such a way that if I'm carrying my cell phone and if my GPS, if my location service is on, and then I can trigger a flow whenever I'm entering a building and leaving a building. So there are a lot of cool use cases you can do, especially if your staff is constantly on the road and you want to have some kind of triggers or some kind of automation based on when they enter a building or leave a building or a certain area. You can implement that using a location-based trigger. So when it comes to setup and installation, you can create logic apps using a modern browser. On another thing is, even though you can use a drag and drop functionality, there is a code view available. That means inside the Logic App Designer, you can start writing your business logic in JSON. You don't have to use a drag and drop functionality. Uh, you can also use Visual Studio for development as well. There's a direct integration available where without having to open a browser, I can go to Visual Studio, I can download the templates and I can start creating Logic App using Visual Studio. Whereas Flow, you need to have a browser. There is no story available where you can use Visual Studio for development. And there is no code view available as well. Before I go into further, any questions so far? And feel free to ask your questions in the chat window. And are you able to hear me fine? And are there any audio lags or is there issue with the video feed? All right, no answer. That means looks like none. So there are no built-in SharePoint flows available with Logic App, whereas when it comes to the Power Automate, there are built-in SharePoint flows available. Now, what does built-in SharePoint flow means? If you go to a modern SharePoint list and if you click on a flow or Power Automate button, you will see this built-in flows where we have request sign off, we have content approval, we have page approval, and we have a set a reminder. And the way you see that is you go to the flow and then you can just start configuring the flows here. Whereas there is no such thing available in Logic Apps. Uh, if you have heard about Power Virtual Agents, it's the newest offering under Power Platform where you can create no-code chatbots or virtual agents. Since Power Virtual Agents are part of a Dynamics family, it coming from the Dynamics product group, there is a really good integration story available between Power Virtual Agent and Microsoft Flow, where from a Power Virtual Agent, I can trigger a Microsoft Flow. The same kind of functionality is not available with Logic Apps. You can still trigger Logic Apps from Power Virtual Agents, but then you have to bring Microsoft Flow in the mix, where from your Power Virtual Agent, you call or you trigger the flow first, and from your flow, you trigger your Logic App. So now let's talk about the pricing, because this is where a lot of your decision will based on when it comes to which one shall I use. Now I have to build automation, especially with SharePoint, and I have this requirements. Whether shall I go with Logic App or whether shall I go with Power Automate? So Logic App, the pricing is simple. It pay as you go. You need to have Azure subscription and your licensing cost is based on consumption. Whereas Microsoft Flow or Power Automate is subscription based, where depending on your subscription, certain things may or may not be available. One of the key thing which is we normally need to implement some advanced automation in SharePoint is HTTP trigger, which is a premium trigger. So if you have Flow license through Office 365 E3, then the HTTP trigger is a premium trigger. That means you had to buy a premium license to use that trigger. There are various options available. I'm not going to go in detail on that, but just keep in mind that HTTP trigger, which you can use to call another flows or which you can use to call Azure function or other logic apps or other APIs, it's actually a premium action. So where do we need to use this particular HTTP trigger? So when it comes to migration, right? Let's say if I had to migrate anything from SharePoint Online to SharePoint On-prem to SharePoint Online, I had to basically re-architecture those or redevelop those automation. So let's talk about event receiver. So if I have an event receiver in SharePoint On-prem, and now if I'm doing a migration to SharePoint Online, I have to basically redesign those. And the way you can do that is you can convert the entire business logic of your event receiver into a flow. As long as the corresponding actions are available, your flow can start on SharePoint list item created, updated, or deleted event. Same with the library, the documents as well. Or if you want to use a custom code, you can your trigger can be your flow, and then your main business logic is in Azure function, where you can write a custom code using C# or Node.js or PowerShell, or you can use a flow as a trigger and you use Azure API apps where you have your customizations, or you can call other APIs as well. So to use a combination of flow and Azure function and combination of flow and Azure API apps, you need the premium license, because the action HTTP is a premium action that you will need to call Azure API app or call Azure function. You can rewrite your entire business logic of the event receiver into a logic app, as long as the corresponding actions are available. Or you can use the combination of logic apps and Azure function, or you can use the combination of logic apps and Azure API apps. Now, only thing you have to keep in mind is with logic apps, with Azure function, and with Azure API apps, the subscription the cost will be based on your usage. So let's say if you are building um, and one thing I didn't know cover is logic apps are very inexpensive to begin with. So if you are, let's say if you are using logic app just to do certain operation, whenever a list item gets changed, and you're calling an Azure function, and let's say your list item gets changed maybe twice or thrice a day, then the monthly cost you're looking for is a fraction of $1. It's not going to be more than that. If you have some advanced scenarios and if you're doing some heavy number crunching in your logic app or in your Azure function or your Azure API app, or if you're doing complex document processing where you're converting a Word document into the PDF, and then your cost will go up. But again, still it will be cheaper as compared to some of the options that we get with the premium license with Microsoft Flow or Power Automate. We can also even use mimic the event receiver using the webhooks or the remote event receiver. So far from my experience, Microsoft Flow and Logic apps are more preferred way to implement a similar functionality as event receivers in SharePoint Online. Now, if you have a timer job, like how you can replicate the same functionality in SharePoint Online. So if you have a timer job on premises, now you are migrating to SharePoint Online, how you can replicate the same kind of functionality? Again, you use the combination of Flow with Azure Function, Azure API apps, or you can use Logic apps with combination of Azure Function, Azure API apps, or you can just use Azure Functions for that matter. And again, so you as architect, or you as a developer, then you need to do a math in terms of, okay, if I have to use to replicate my timer job, if I have to use combination of Flow plus Azure function, then I will need to use HTTP action, which is a premium action, and that means I have to pay for premium license. So you need to calculate that cost versus if you go with something called Logic Apps and Azure function, how much that cost will be, and most likely the cost going with Logic Apps and Azure function will be less as compared to going with the premium license with Flow. Especially I'm talking here in terms of in the context of SharePoint, because when it comes to the timer job, the maximum things I have seen people do is manipulate some list items or manipulate some documents or create some assets, and those kind of things generally won't cost you a lot in Azure. So when it comes to the overall comparison, let's say if someone asks me, okay, can you visualize, or can you give me the high level overview of the comparison between Logic Apps versus Microsoft Flow? Then this is how I can provide you the visualization. And here I have six different categories: licensing, then personal automation, power user friendly, developer friendly, integration with third party system, and overall. So when it comes to the licensing, I personally think Logic apps are much straightforward because everything is pay as you go, and you can use Azure calculator, pricing calculator, to find out how much will be the cost, and you can uh, work with your in your Azure subscription to find like and find the actual amount as well. Whereas Microsoft Flow is a little bit complicated because some things are free, some things are premium, and the licensing is a little bit complicated if you are using Flow from Office 365 license. If you are using Flow from Dynamics license, chances are a lot of things you're trying to use are already covered. Whereas if you are trying to use Flow from Office 65 license, some of the actions or some of the triggers or some of the connectors may not be available, and you have to pay a premium for that. When it comes to the personal automation, Microsoft Flow is great. There are a lot of different scenarios you can cover. Whereas Logic Apps, since you had to pay for using Logic Apps, uh, uh, that's why there are some I gave it less point. And again, to use Flow, you can start with the free tier of Flow as well. All you need is a valid Hotmail or MSN or Microsoft account, and you can start using Flow for free. You also get Flow for free from your Office 65 license as well. When it comes to the power user friendly, Logic apps are a little bit intimidating because you had to go to the Azure portal and you had to navigate through the Azure portal. So when it comes to the user friendliness, it's not power user friendly. Whereas Microsoft Flow is power user friendly. Like if you're a power user, then you can easily navigate with the Microsoft within Microsoft Flow. When it comes to the developer friendly, Logic apps are much more developer friendly because there's a direct integration available with Visual Studio. There is a really good story for our application lifecycle management as well. When it comes to the integration with third-party system, the connectors, they both the products offer are pretty much the same. So I gave the same point. So the overall, these two products are the same. Only thing is when to use depends. So for since I mentioned in the beginning, I work in our intelligent business process automation practice. So a lot of times, depending on the automation scenario, I choose Logic Apps versus Microsoft Flow. And a lot of time, the decision is purely based on the cost, like the licensing cost. So let's say if my client is using Power Automate through Office 65 license, and they need to call Azure function, or they need to call external API, or they need to call another flow from that from flow, and then to do that we need to have a premium license. So normally you need to do a math, okay, how much it's going to cost me for the premium license versus if I implement the same functionality with Logic App, how much it's going to cost me. And 90% of the time in the context of SharePoint, the cost will be very less. With that, I want to pause and see if there are any other questions so far. All right, looks like there are no questions, so that's good. Let me see. All right. Um, all right. So there is, so as I mentioned before, Microsoft Flow or Power Automate is built on the top of Logic App. So there is a good story available where, let's say you start developing an event receiver. Sorry, if you start developing automation in Office 65 using Microsoft Flow. Now, because of some of the complexity in the automation, you have to call Azure function, and you are coming from Office, you have using Flow from Office 65 license. That means the action that we'll be using to call Azure function, which is HTTP, is a premium action. So in that case, what you can do is you can export your Flow as a Logic app, and you can deploy as a Logic app, and then using the Logic app, you can easily call the Azure function. Only thing you'll be get charged is how many times you use that. And for that, you can use the Azure pricing calculator. And as I mentioned, if you are just doing a SharePoint operations, like updating some list items and maybe creating some new items or deleting some items, your cost will be a fraction of $1 per month. Or maybe if you're doing some more number crunching, so maybe less than $100 per month, definitely. So with that, let's see quickly how we can do that. So now I'll be showing you a couple of demos here. So the first thing I want to quickly give you an overview. If this is the first time you're seeing the Microsoft Flow, then you have to go to the flow.microsoft.com, and this is how the user interface will look like, where under the left-hand navigation, you will be seeing My Flows. If you click on that, then here you can see all the flows that you have created so far, and those will be categorized under 4 different types. One is the My Flow, that means the flow that you have created. The team flows are the flows which you have created and shared with at least one other user or any or other Office 365 group or SharePoint list. Business process flows are the one you create, are the one where you need to you have a CDS and you can create sophisticated workflows. Only thing is you need a premium license for that. And UI flows are a RPA offering from Microsoft. And looks like I don't have a license. I need to sign my trial expired for that. And if I had to create a flow, I just have to go to my flow and then click on new. And here I have an option. I can create a flow from a template. I can create a flow from a Visio template, or I can create a flow from a blank as well. And if I go here and let's say if I instant from blank, then let's give it a name as M365 Virtual Marathon 01. Let's say if I select a manual, create, and the reason I'm showing you is because the user experience that you are seeing here, you will see the exact same kind of user experience when we try to create a new logic app. So if I click a new step here, then I can use the built-in connectors. And if I look for the SharePoint here, then I'll be seeing all the options available or all the actions that are available which are related to the SharePoint. Okay, so this is about Microsoft Flow. Now let me go to the Logic App UI. So if this is the first time you're seeing about that, then let's go here. So for that, you have to go to your Azure portal. And in case if you don't have access, you need to work with your you have to if you don't have access, you need to work with your admins to get the access. And to create a new logic app, you have to click on create a resource. And here search for logic app. And this is the screen will come where you click on create. And there are some additional steps you have to do because now this is a part of Azure. So just like in Azure, you have to provide some kind of information, what kind of subscription you will have, what will be the resource group. So I'll be using this. What will be the name? So M365 Virtual Marathon Demo 02. Then the location. I'll be using East US as well. And then review and create. So if everything is fine, and if I click on create, that it will start creating the logic app. So far it is just creating the logic app. It is not, we haven't configured anything yet. Okay, so it's got created. And if I click on go to resource, now here I have to mention what kind of trigger I have to, I'm getting redirected to the logic app designer. And here I have to provide what kind of trigger it will be, like how the logic app will be triggered, what kind of actions it will have. So if you see here, this will look familiar to you, just like you saw in the flow. So I can always start from the blank. And here, if I click on SharePoint and click SharePoint here, so I'll basically seeing pretty much the same kind of actions that you saw there in Flow versus in Power Automate. So again, the user experience is pretty much the same. One additional thing that is available here is, so not only we can use drag and drop and browser for Logic App, but we can also use the code view. Where if I use the code view, I can start developing the Logic App using JSON. So it's everything under the hood is all built using the JSON. Okay. So now with that, let's see now. Let's say if I have already deployed, created a large Microsoft Flow, and now I would like to export that to a Logic app. How I will do that? So for that, I will go to my flows here. I'm not going to save this. And I will select this because this is the one I have selected to export into a Logic app. Then click on these three buttons here and then click on export. So when you click export, you have two options. You can export it as a package or you can export that as a Logic app template. Then when you do that, it will download that file to you. Now the next step we have to do is we have to go to basically our Logic app portal to do that. So let me go to our Logic app portal here and sorry, Microsoft Azure portal. I will click on create a resource. And the thing I'll be looking for here is template deployment. And inside this, I will be click create. And here the option I'll be selecting is build your own template in the editor. So once I'm here, the option I'll be selecting is load a file here. So if I select this, then I'll be using the same file which I downloaded here. Click open and save. So now I'm actually getting now since it's a custom deployment, I have to provide the various option in terms of the what will be the resource group, then what will be the name of this Logic app. So in this case, I'll be like, okay, M365 VM demo 03. Then what should be the SharePoint connection it will be using, and what will be the Office 365 connection it will be using. And the name of the connection will appear depending on what kind of connections you are using in your flow. And once you click agree to this, and then you click on purchase. If everything is well, then it will get deployed. And you see here, everything is good in terms of the configuration that we did, and the deployment is actually successful. So if I go to the resource, oh, sorry. Okay. All right, let's see. So the name we selected inside this is virtual element 02. Oh, looks like we selected 03. Sorry about that. Let me select that. Okay, this is the one. So once the export operation is complete, and looks like this is not so okay. This is not the one we selected. So let me select which one was this. Okay, go to the resource. Okay, this is the one we created. Okay, and now I should be seeing the same kind of action that I saw in the designer. So if I go, why it's not showing up? So let's do this from the beginning. Okay, so we'll do here, and we'll search from the template using the custom deployment. Click create, and build your own template in the editor, and load a file. We'll select the file, the JSON file, and then we'll click save, and then we will basically provide the name. So resource group is the same one, and the name this time I'll be using something else. So M365 Virtual marathon 100. Okay, and this is also called 100, and this is also called 100. And click agree and click on purchase. So if everything goes well, we'll be seeing the same kind of actions available in our new a logic app. Okay, so deployment is successful. So it went to it. We came back to the. All right, this is the one we created in the back. All right. So it does take some time to appear in the search. All right. So here you see I'm not starting from a blank here. So if you see the name, even though we use 100, but this is the one we tried previously. And if I go and click edit here, I should be seeing the same kind of actions that I have in Microsoft Flow. Only thing you have to make sure is some of the actions may not work as it is. You have to reconfigure those. But this is a good way of converting your Microsoft Flow into a logic app, especially now you have a scenario where you started with something and because now you need a premium license. Instead of purchasing a premium license, you convert the flow into a logic app and you go ahead with your business logic inside a logic app. So I say this action because the connections are not valid and I had to do that. But you got the point where we can implement this pretty. We can extend this fairly easily. Let's see if there are any questions so far. No. So let's quickly talk about 2 minutes some of the best practices for the Microsoft Flow and Logic apps. Those are pretty much the same. Only there is a one difference. So I will not be covering the Logic apps one, but basically naming conventions are very important when it comes to the flows because if you remember when I show you the option of my flows, all the flows that you have created will be listed there, or all the flows that you have shared or someone else have shared with you will be listed in a team flow. So having a good naming convention is very, very important. You can use any convention that work for you. I personally use the name of the connector, the site, the list or library, the list name and purpose. Inside the flow, you also should name the actions. And if you are creating the flow and the flow are not for your personal usage and it's for work, then add the owners to your flows and convert to a team flow. Because if for some reason, if you're no longer working with that group or you leave the organization, then the admins will have a hard time to track down your flow. Either they need to have a premium license or they need to use PowerShell to track that down. And also add the comments because your comments will definitely help your fellow team members and also you as well in case you are adding some complex business logic in your flow. Specify the appropriate trigger condition because if you have a flow which gets triggered on every time a new items get every time new items get created or updated, and inside the flow if you're updating the same item, then you will have an infinite loop. So you have to make sure you apply specify appropriate trigger condition. And since the maximum run of a flow is 30 days, make sure you break down your flow into multiple flows. And this is true for any workflow, and it doesn't matter what kind of technology you're using, whether you're using Microsoft Flow, a Logic App, or SharePoint Designer Workflows, or Nintex, or K2, or Agile Point. Always have a flowchart handy. That means whatever your overall business process is, make sure you document that using a flowchart. You can use Microsoft Visio to create sophisticated flowchart. Pen and paper work too. That means you can just draw on a pen and paper and then take a picture and store that in a secure location, or you can draw on a whiteboard and take a picture of that. So Logic App best practices are pretty much the same. Uh, in case you are interested, you can get your personal Office 65 developer tenant because with Office 65, you also get access to Power Automate. So for that, you can go to dev.office.com, sign up for a developer program where you get a personal Office 65 E5 subscription for free for 3 months with 25 users. And if you are using it for personal development and training, Microsoft may extend your trial for another 3 months. Just remember this link, Microsoft 365 Developer Program. You can also sign up for the free trial using the regular products.office.com. In case you are interested in exploring Logic apps, for that you need to have Azure subscription. So there are multiple ways you can get that. If you have MSDN account, via MSDN account, you can get Azure subscription. You can also sign up for free trial. Right now we get $200 of credit that is available for valid for 1 year. And you can also use something called Microsoft Imagine, which used to call DreamSpark before, where you don't need a credit card, but you need a valid .edu account from a participating school. So not all schools participate in that. So this may not be available for everyone. But if for some reason, if your school participate in this, you will get a free Azure subscription with limited feature set. So hopefully the concept we covered today made you familiar with some of the key differences between Power Automate and Logic apps. And when it comes to writing automation in SharePoint, you can basically do an evaluation and see which one will work best in a particular scenario. And if you don't have access to Office 365, you can sign up for developer program to get that. So recap, we covered all this stuff.